hang out with me. Okay? We'd have to have an experience together to really know me. You know, Yeshua says, know a tree by its fruit. Alright, so if you run into a tree early in its season, how much fruit does it have on it? How long does it take a tree that's newly planted, does anybody know this, to bear fruit?
3 years.
Minimum 2 to 3 years.
Alright, let's say 3 years. So if you run into this tree in the first year, how do you know it? It hasn't borne any fruit yet. So you go back the second year, and there's still no fruit. And then you go back the third year. How are you going to know, okay, there's some fruit hanging on this tree. How are you going to know whether this tree is good or bad? Huh? You got to taste the fruit. You got to pick a pear and taste it and see if it's any good. You pick the pear and it tastes like lemon, you're in trouble, right? But it took time. And Yeshua said to know a tree by its fruit. The word know in Hebrew is an experiential thing. It's not a knowledge of. Go back to our Torah portion, and we'll read this passage again in verse 8, where it says, now a king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. I would submit to you that there had to be knowledge of Joseph in Egypt when this guy took over, because of all the things that took place. 100 years worth of experience of running the country. It'd be kind of like us saying, who doesn't know George Washington? You know? That kind of thing. But the same word in Hebrew is used here that was used back in Genesis 22 with Abraham, when God called to him and said, now I know that you fear me. Now I know. Because yada means we've had an experience together. So what we have here is a Pharaoh that came on the scene that never experienced Joseph. It wasn't that he didn't know of him. It was that he never experienced the greatness of Joseph. He didn't have an experience with him that would warrant anything but envy of Joseph. And he saw what happened to the people in the land and how they were multiplying and how they were growing. So immediately, instead of appreciating what Joseph did, he was intimidated by it. And decided, did he decide or did God decide that he was going to have a hard heart against the Israelites? It was God's decision. God brought somebody onto the scene. The time was up for Israel to leave. The clock had ticked and the schedule had been met. So God had to bring somebody on the scene that had no experience with Joseph, so that they could be the vessel that he would use to harden, to make them want to leave the land, to finally accomplish what he wanted to accomplish. So this is the setting that we find here. All right, when this Pharaoh, and I belabored that point a little bit because we have the same situation in our walk with God. If I really want to know Yvonne, I gotta make an effort to know her. If I want to make an effort, if I want to know Phil, I got to make an effort to know Phil. It's not good enough for me to just say, well, I know him because he comes in on Shabbat. It's about relationship. And our relationship to God is the same way. If you look at Matthew chapter 7, in relationship to this, we have a scenario here where Yeshua, and basically I think these chapters, that you've heard me say this before, is his dissertation on Torah. But he says in Matthew 7:21, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. This is extremely important. But he who does the will of my Father, who is in heaven, will enter. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? And in your name cast out demons? And in your name perform many miracles? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. Now, I'll use this word of knowing what you know about knowing. Don't you think Yeshua was talking about something different than just knowledge?
That's right. Personal relationship.
He was talking about personal relationship. He was talking about personal experience. It's not enough that you know him. You have to know that he knows you. Because it's an interactive experience that we have to have. Now, we have a word for that. We've coined a phrase for that. And we use it here all the time. And that's the phrase of being born again. You come to a point in your life where you know that you know him and you know that he knows you. Because you've had an incredible interaction spiritually with him. Same thing that happened to Abraham. Same thing that happened to Moses. Moses is getting ready to have that interaction in his Torah portion. But this is the thing that Yeshua says we have to have with him. We have to know that he knows us. How do we know that he knows us? Anybody have any ideas?
By our walk.
By our walk. Everything's proven by our walk. It's our fruit. It's who we are. By our lifestyle. What are we doing with the understanding that he's given us? What are we doing with this relationship? Are we nurturing a relationship with him? Or are we just skimming the surface of it? There's some in here that I don't even talk to, but maybe once a week. Some of you I know better than others. I know personally we've all talked at some point in time, but a lot of the relationships that I have with you in here are right on the surface. Because I really don't know you. Let's face it. I have the faith that you're walking in the Lord as I am walking in the Lord. I have the faith that you have that confidence in me and I have that confidence in you. Because how can we really, as Mike says, how can we really just hang out together? Life kind of gets in the way. But we can hang out with him all the time. We can nurture the relationship with him all the time. Not settle for just the introduction. Not settle for just being knowledgeable about him and say, oh yeah, I know who Jesus is, or I know who Yeshua is. No. Go deeper than that. And know who he really is. And know that he knows who you really are. Because I would submit to you that if you're in that situation like Abraham, that you're going to do his will. Because your desire is going to be to do his will. Your desire is not going to be contrary to that. It's not that you're not going to have temptations and not going to have battles, but your desire is going to be to do his will. And you're not going to be satisfied, and you're not going to be happy, you're not going to be at peace unless you are doing his will. These are ways that you know him and he knows you. Being obedient, not out of duty. Because he says in here, get away from me, depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. Right? You who have no Torah in your life. You who have no Torah in your halakha. You who have no obedience to my commandments in the way that you walk, in the way that you live. Because it's not enough just to say the words, just to mouth the words. It's not some kind of insurance card. So this idea of yada is a Hebrew idea. It comes from the Hebrew language of an interactive type of experience and knowledge that that God has with His people, and that we have to have with Him. So back to our Torah portion. This Pharaoh did not have that kind of experience with Joseph. So we find, I'm not going to go through the whole story because I know all of you read your Torah portions. So we find that Moses, this is where he starts his walk. And if we skip over, we find him in the wilderness, the latter part of chapter 2, where after he has slain an Egyptian, two of his Hebrew brothers were fighting, and he comes upon them to break up the fight, and they said, "What, are you going to kill us too, just like you did the Egyptian?" And he realizes that word has gotten out. He didn't keep it very quiet, and he's afraid that he's going to be captured and killed or thrown into jail or whatever, so he runs and ends up in the wilderness of Midian. The wilderness of Midian, which is where Mount Sinai is. And he spends a period of time out there in the wilderness. And it says in chapter 3, well, let me go back a little bit. It says in 23, verse 23 of chapter 3, I'll get it right. Now it came about in the course of many days that the king of Egypt died, and his sons of Israel sighed because of the bondage, and they cried out, and their cry for help because of their bondage rose up to God. So God heard their groaning, and God remembered His covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and saw the sons of Israel, and He took notice of them. Excuse me. Now, by this time, Moses was pasturing a flock in the wilderness, and he has his burning bush experience. His burning bush experience. This is where he has the experience when he begins to know the living God. And God interacts with him and tells him what He's going to do. And Moses says to him, beginning in verse 11, he says, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and that I should bring the sons of Israel out of Egypt?" One of the brothers pointed out that there's like 5 excuses Moses gives for not wanting to be the person that God wants him to be. He was like the resistant deliverer. Here, he's speaking of who am I? You know, I'm nobody. You know, was he really speaking from that position, or was he speaking out of fear? Because in Egypt, he was a prince. And now he's going to go back as a leader of the Hebrews. Different situation. And he says, "Certainly I will be with you," God said, "and this shall be the sign that is that I have sent you. When you have brought all the people out of Egypt, you shall worship God at this mountain." So they're on Mount Horeb, they're at Mount Sinai, and he says, that's going to be the sign that I've chosen. You're going to bring them all the way to this mountain so that they can worship me here. And Moses says, "Behold, I am going to the sons of Israel, and I will say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. Now what am I going to say when they say, what's His name? What do I tell them?" And here is where God identifies Himself. And I want to spend some time talking about this, because it's